Hello everybody, it's Foo here. Today I want to talk about power creep in Pokemon. It's a controversial topic that can be quite divisive and is usually spoken about anecdotally. Just search broken Pokemon on YouTube to see that a lot of people misunderstand the concept of broken and label some very strange Pokemon broken. This may be because they don't have great knowledge of a specific metagame or don't understand the Pokemon's place within that metagame, or it may come from a place of a YouTuber trying to get extra clicks by putting broken in their thumbnail or title. But what I want to do with this video is to find a way to actually examine power creep by looking at real data to see if power creep even exists and whether it's having a negative impact on competitive Pokemon. I also want to dispel some myths and misunderstandings along the way. So first, let's define power creep. In competitive games, for power creep to occur, you must first have an established metagame. Then new tools are added, in this case new Pokemon, which may disrupt the metagame. Seriously powerful Pokemon may dominate and force you to change your approach to team building and battling. The most powerful ones may be so strong that you have to justify not putting them on your team because not using them is a handicap that will put you at a serious disadvantage. Power creep is not necessarily just making an old Pokemon less viable. For example, in Generation 5, Scolipede was introduced. It's a bug poison type, and we already had a bug poison type in Beedrill. They performed similar roles as physical attackers, but Scolipede was much faster and more powerful than Beedrill. It also had better coverage options. Scolipede was almost a direct upgrade to Beedrill, and it made Beedrill pretty much obsolete. But this doesn't count as power creep because Beedrill was never particularly viable in the first place, so making it even less viable doesn't push the power level of the game. Scolipede was good, but it wasn't broken. But how do we define power? Well, Karen would have you believe that it's only the selfish perception of people. But if you play competitive Pokemon, you know that not all Pokemon are born equal. How good a Pokemon is in competitive is determined by its typing, its stats, its ability, and its move pool. And you can get a good idea of how well a Pokemon might perform by looking at these things in abstract. But even this is anecdotal, and we want to be able to measure how good a Pokemon is. So what's the best way to do this? Well, really the best way to do it is to look at usage statistics. We want to know the Chad Pokemon that are always picked first for the baseball team. If you are playing competitive Pokemon, presumably you want to win. And if you want to win, you're more likely to choose stronger Pokemon to allow you to do that. Even if you want to pick a random, less viable or more hipster Pokemon, you will still have to build around that Pokemon and have other good Pokemon to support them. So overall, that averages out to the best Pokemon being used the most. And I want to look at different metagames because doubles and singles in Pokemon are very different metas. So I'll be looking at VGC and I'll be looking at the Smogon usage-based tiering system. Let's start with VGC. We'll look at each generation to see how many of the top 20 most used Pokemon were newly introduced in that generation, which will show you if the power has crept up in that generation, if there are lots of new Pokemon in the top 20 used Pokemon. And we can use Peakalytics for this usage data. But we are limited to start at Generation 6 as the data doesn't go back any further, and if we want to look further back it will be more anecdotal. It's also important to note that Peakalytics isn't a perfectly accurate metric of the VGC meta, as it only takes into account usage on Pokemon Showdown Simulator, and it doesn't take into account games that are played in-game on the DS or the Switch. I'll also look at the normal format and then the restricted format separately. So let's look at this data. Generation 6. We're starting with VGC 15, which is the first Generation 6 format that allowed the national dex. So that's allowing us to compare newly introduced Pokemon in Generation 6 with all of the previously introduced Pokemon. What we see, out of the 20 most used Pokemon, 7 of them were newly introduced in Generation 6, which is a decent proportion. Of these 7, 3 are new Pokemon in the Kalos Dex, and 4 are actually megaforms of pre-existing Pokemon. So the 3 newly introduced Pokemon are Sylveon, Aegislash, and Talonflame, And the Mega Pokemon are Mega Kangaskhan, Mega Gardevoir, Mega Salamence, and Mega Charizard Y. However, it's not as simple as that because there is one outlier. Mega Kangaskhan is used far more frequently than any of the others, with over 50% of teams featuring a Mega Kangaskhan. And that fits with most people's recollection of this format because of the Chalk core, which was so common. This is a core of Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss, Landorus, and Kangaskhan. We can look at the VGC 2015 top 8 teams at Worlds, and this is borne out in those teams too. Basically, all of them had a similar variant of this Chalk core. These 5 Pokemon that I mentioned were very oppressive and super common. But only one Pokemon from Generation 6 featured on this team. However, I would say that Generation 6 did seem to be a bit of a power creep compared to previous generations because of how restrictive team building felt, that you couldn't stray far from this combination. We'll move on to the next normal format without restricted Pokemon, and that was in Generation 7 in 2018 when we had the National Dex Pokemon again, so we can compare. And similarly here, we have 7 of the top 20 most frequently used Pokemon being newly introduced in Generation 7. Those are Incineroar, Tapu Fini, Kartana, Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Nihilego, and Tapu Bulu. So it's interesting to note that 4 of those 7 are Tapu Pokemon, the Island Guardians, and that's because of terrain wars, which were very prevalent in this metagame. This may be slightly inflated the use of the Tapu Pokemon because they were the only things with which you could gain terrain control, so most teams would probably opt to have at least one of these Pokemon to be able to control the terrain in such a way. Outside of that, you have Incineroar and Kartana, which formed a really nice core with Tapu Fini, to be fair, and those 3, Incineroar, Tapu Fini, and Kartana, all had over 40% usage, which is still very high. The other Pokemon I mentioned had lower usage. Looking at the top 8 teams of the World's VGC 2018 tournament, you do see a bit more variety compared to the VGC 2015, which is an indicator that maybe no one Pokemon was so oppressive as to force a particular playstyle, and that allowed players a bit more freedom with their Pokemon selections. Then we can move on to Generation 8, so we can look at the most recent format, which is the Series 9 format in VGC 21 in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and of the top 20 most used Pokemon in that format, we have 9 Pokemon from Generation 8, which is more than in Generation 6 and Generation 7, which is pretty interesting. So those are Regieleki, Rillaboom, Urshifu Rapid Strike, Urshifu Single Strike, Grimmsnarl, Glastrier, Dragapult, Spectrier, and Galarian Moltres. Now what's interesting to note here is that we no longer have Megas in the game, so that could be considered maybe a bit of a power drain, but even in the circumstances of that, we do have a lot of very competent, strong Pokemon that are making the top 20 in this metagame. And what's particularly interesting is actually the usage of each individual Pokemon is much lower than the top 20 in other generations. So the most used Pokemon is actually Incineroar with 40%. That was obviously not introduced in Generation 8. But if we look at the most used Pokemon in VGC 18, that was Landorus with 64%, and in VGC 15, it was again Landorus with 61%, and multiple Pokemon being over 50% usage. This indicates that the Generation 8 meta has the most freedom in terms of Pokemon selection for many generations, again indicating that no one Pokemon is so oppressive that it should be on most teams and that there's only one way to deal with it. So a takeaway from the metas with no restricted Pokemon seems to be that there was a power step in Generation 6 when the power of Pokemon increased dramatically. In Generation 7, not so much changed there. There were some very viable Pokemon introduced, but it didn't seem to be a power step like the previous generation. And then in Generation 8, with the removal of certain Mega Pokemon and the introduction of some very competent Pokemon in Generation 8, we have the most versatile meta that we've had for a long time, which is very balanced. Overall, this seems that since Generation 6, there actually hasn't been much power creep. Now we can quickly consider restricted formats. So in Generation 6, we had a ton of really strong legendary Pokemon introduced. We had Primal Groudon, Xerneas, Primal Kyogre, Mega Rayquaza, and Yveltal. And despite you only being able to have 2 restricted Pokemon on your team, you had crazy usage statistics for the newly introduced Pokemon. Primal Groudon was on 65% of teams, and Xerneas was on 56% of teams. You then had Primal Kyogre on 38%, Mega Rayquaza on 29%, and even Yveltal sneaked into the top 20 most used Pokemon at 11%. What's crazy about this is that no other restricted Pokemon came in the top 20 most used, and the Generation 6 legendaries were just very prevalent in that format, and those were the threats that you had to prepare for. Generation 7 definitely did not mirror this. With the introduction of Lunala and Solgaleo, as well as the Necrozma forms and Zygarde Complete, only Lunala and Necrozma Dawnwings actually made it into the top 20 most frequently used Pokemon, because the Generation 6 restricted Pokemon was still so prevalent and threatening. Then we can move on to Generation 8, and we've had Series 8, which was a restricted format, but this is slightly different to previous ones because you only get to select 1 restricted Pokemon instead of 2. We saw a lot of use of Zacian. Zamazenta didn't really see any use at all, but Zacian was on almost 1 in 3 teams, which is a lot. However, we do have to consider that Primal Groudon, Primal Kyogre, and Mega Rayquaza are no longer in the game. We had Calyrex, Ice Rider, and Shadow Rider, which both just squeaked into the top 20 most used Pokemon, and they are very scary Pokemon to go up against, but they were not used anywhere near as much as Zacian. Overall, I would say that Zacian is a bit of a power step in terms of restricted Pokemon, but not so much as the Generation 6 step. So now we've considered doubles formats, let's move to the singles formats to consider power creep there, and we'll look at the Smogon usage-based tiering system. Fortunately here we don't need to delve into a load of data because Smogon has done our work for us. They ban Pokemon if they think that they are broken, which is kind of what we're looking for. Now, I know that some people don't agree with banning Pokemon. People who don't play Smogon may say that the game contains the tools for you to be able to deal with any Pokemon, which is true, but if you don't ban certain Pokemon, then metagames can get very stagnant because one Pokemon is so oppressive that you don't have the freedom to try different things in team building, or else you're just going to get steamrolled by one particularly strong Pokemon. So, Smogon tried to keep their tiers competitive and allow for innovation by banning the most oppressive Pokemon. So what we're going to consider are the banned Pokemon in each generation, and you can see where whichever generation has the most banned Pokemon obviously had more of a power creep that generation. And with Smogon, we have the data about the banned Pokemon going all the way back to Generation 1, baby. Generally, the main legendaries and some of the mythical Pokemon in each generation will be banned, so I won't really mention them too much, but there are some other legendary Pokemon that I might mention. It's really the non-legendary Pokemon that are more of a hint about the power creep, but we'll go into it in more detail. So in Generation 1, the only Pokemon that were banned were Mew and Mewtwo. Generation 2, the box art legendaries and Celebi. Generation 3, we had the box art legendaries. We also had Latias and Latios banned, and we have our first non-legendary Pokemon in Wobbuffet and Wynaut. They were banned because of their Shadow Tag ability, which prevents you from switching, and in competitive Pokemon, switching is such a fundamental part of the game. So this is an extremely powerful ability, and its introduction was definitely an indicator of power creep. So there you have it, Wobbuffet was changing the game. In Generation 4, we have obviously the box art legendaries banned again, as well as Manaphy and Deoxys, and we have another non-legendary Pokemon for more vanilla reasons. Garchomp is just very, very strong, it's bulky, it hits really hard, it has a good speed tier, and it has a bit of an obnoxious ability in Sand Veil, meaning that if Sand's up, it dodges stuff, which is kind of not fun. So yeah, Garchomp was banned in Generation 4. Now moving on to Generation 5, and this is where things get much spicier. So in Generation 5, we had the box art legendaries banned, and Genesect was banned as well. And then we had some of the genies banned, but some of them not. In fact, each of them had one form banned and one form legal. So Landorus Incarnate was banned, Thundurus Incarnate was banned, and Tornadus Therian was banned, all having been in the tier for some time and then being judged to be too strong for that tier. The other notable Generation 5 introduction was Excadrill with its Sandrush ability that was teetering on the brink of being banned for a while. It did get banned for a bit, and then there was like a more complex ban about weather abilities. Drought and Drizzle were newly added this generation, and abilities that double your speed in the weathers were always a problem. And remember, Generation 5 weather lasted forever. So yeah, this was an interesting one, and it led to a complex ban. Excadrill, I would say, is an example of a power creep Pokemon because it definitely was pushing that power. So all in all, it was kind of like 4 Pokemon that were initially in the tier that got banned: Landorus, Thundurus, Tornadus, and Excadrill. Now let's move on to Generation 6, and this one was a crazy one. So all in all, there were 8 non-legendary Pokemon banned here, 6 of which were Mega forms of previous Pokemon. But that's really important to say because obviously Generation 6 with the Mega Evolution mechanic, this was the generation that really pushed the power level of the game. You also had Aegislash and Greninja, both of which were extremely powerful Pokemon, so it wasn't a surprise that they were banned too. You also had Hooper Unbound banned as well. But the Mega Pokemon banned were Mega Gengar, Mega Kangaskhan, Mega Lucario, Mega Mawile, Mega Sableye, and Mega Salamence. Now, when Pokemon are banned, they go into the Ubers tier, which had its own metagame, which a lot of people like to play. They like to see these massive legendary Pokemon duke it out. The issue with Generation 6 was that one Pokemon was too powerful for even this tier. It was so powerful that it was even oppressive when you had access to all of the other legendary Pokemon, and that is Mega Rayquaza. So this Pokemon got banned to a tier completely on its own, which is anything goes. So you could basically use anything there, and a lot of clauses were lifted in anything goes too. So Mega Rayquaza really shifted the power level of the game. Going on to Generation 7, and there were far fewer bans, Zygarde Complete Form was available and was banned. And then you had 2 non-legendary Pokemon, which were Naganadel and Pheromosa, both of which were Ultra Beasts that had the Beast Boost ability and could snowball quite easily. But outside of that, there wasn't really anything. So Generation 7, really not too much of a power creep here in the singles format. Then we consider Generation 8, and this is a very interesting one. The most non-legendary Pokemon were banned in this generation, namely Cinderace, which is basically like a physical attacking version of Greninja with its Libero ability, able to change type and give it same type attack bonus on all of its attacks. You also had Galarian Darmanitan with an inbuilt choice band with its ability, so powerful and very hard to deal with. And also Dracovish with its Fishious Rend that doubles in power if you go first, just so strong and very hard to deal with too. You also had 2 legendary Pokemon in Spectria and Urshifu on top of obviously the box art legendaries. And so in total you had 5 Pokemon banned, which is less than other generations, including Generation 6, but still having so many non-legendary Pokemon banned was quite interesting to see. But that's not where the story stops, because we have more Pokemon going into the Anything Goes tier. Zacian Crowned was banned from the Ubers tier, much like Mega Rayquaza. It's worth noting again that Primal Groudon, Primal Kyogre, and Mega Rayquaza are no longer a thing, nor are any of the other Megas. It remains to be seen whether Zacian Crowned would be going into Anything Goes if any of them did exist. I think that Primal Groudon would have a pretty good matchup against Zacian Crowned. It would be interesting to see a metagame with both of them there together. But for now, Zacian Crowned, too powerful for Ubers, it goes into Anything Goes. And then on top of that, I think one of the most interesting things is that the entire mechanic of Dynamax was banned from the singles metagame, and so it went straight to Anything Goes. Now this is really interesting because this is such an intrinsic part of Generation 8, and banning the whole thing in the singles meta is really an indication of power creep, or rather an indication of a mechanic that was implemented that seems very balanced in doubles, and maybe one of the contributing factors to having such a stable and varied meta currently, but being completely unbalanced in the singles meta when things can snowball way too quickly, or it can just be so hard to deal with the Dynamax Pokemon. So this was banned to Anything Goes, and I think it is just an interesting demonstration of the power creep in terms of singles in Generation 8. So what are the takeaways from this deep dive into power creep? I would say that the first thing to note is Generation 6 was really where there was a massive power step, and everything got much more powerful in both singles, where there were tons and tons of bans, and also in doubles, where you were very restricted in your team building and you didn't have the freedom to pick lots of different stuff because there were just some very oppressive Pokemon that you needed to deal with, and the best way to deal with them was to pick them yourself. The other reflection is that Generation 8 has introduced some very powerful new Pokemon. We saw a lot of non-legendary Pokemon getting banned in singles, and we see very high usage of these new Pokemon, more so than in other generations. But we have a very stable VGC metagame, and we have a very stable singles metagame. And that can be for multiple reasons. I think getting rid of Megas has actually been a little bit of a step back in power in terms of VGC, and has allowed for a bit more variety, as well as a Dynamax mechanic that may actually help less viable Pokemon double their HP, gain access to some really powerful moves that they might otherwise not have access to, and it's a bit of a leveler. And in singles, with Smogon, you always have this banning system, so you can always create a stable metagame by getting rid of the broken stuff. So I think either way, while people may talk about power creep, this generation it's not so much of an issue. In terms of doubles, I would say if something has a usage statistic of over 50%, then it's probably problematic, but we're not seeing that at all in the Series 9 VGC meta. And in terms of singles, there may be some broken things, but they tend to get banned. And because we've been playing this game for so long now, most of the obviously broken Pokemon will have already been banned, so you've got quite a stable meta. So next time you hear someone talking about a broken Pokemon, consider if it fits either of those definitions. Is it used in more than 50% of teams in VGC? Or has it been banned by Smogon? Are people who play the Smogon tier thinking about banning that Pokemon? If not, then the Pokemon probably isn't broken. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, it really helps out the channel. And subscribe for more content. Consider clicking the notification button because I don't have a regular upload schedule, so if you don't want to miss a video, you can get a notification that way. All that's left to be said is I've been Foo, you've been awesome, and hopefully see you next time. Goodbye.